Hi there and welcome to the channel, and in this video I'll be reflecting on both the quality and the quantity of the books I read in October. Now, in terms of quantity, I read 5 plays this month and 3 non-fiction works, and in terms of quality it was an extraordinarily high month, as you will see, because the 5 plays I read were all by Shakespeare. So without any further ado, let's begin. So my intention this month was to read all of Shakespeare's plays and poems which have a link with Rome, and I didn't quite manage that, but the first one I read did satisfy those criteria. It was Coriolanus. Okay, so Coriolanus was around just after the reign of the 7 kings in the early days of the Roman Republic, and as preparation for reading this play, I read the section on Coriolanus in Livy's The Early History of Rome. It's only 8 pages or so, but it does introduce you to the main characters. And then, slightly longer, it's Plutarch's biography of Coriolanus. He pairs him with Alcibiades, and this was a very enjoyable read. Contains considerably more detail than Livy, and you can see that Shakespeare principally drew on Plutarch's account for his play, and it's testimony to the strength of the dramatic speeches in Plutarch that Shakespeare preserves them almost verbatim. And that also speaks to the unbroken continuity of rhetorical practices between Rome and the Elizabethan theatre. All right, so Coriolanus itself is about a great warrior who, returning from battle, decides that he will take a job as consul, one of the top political positions in Rome, or the top political positions. You would traditionally share this position with a fellow member of the Senate, and rather than simply go through the formalities of being approved by the people, their tribune, he antagonizes them and they reject him becoming consul, and then in fact launch a case against him and quickly sentence him to death. He is rescued by some of his associates, and they advise him to go back and face trial. However, he decides that he will not do so and instead is cast out of Rome, whereupon he joins forces with the enemy of Rome, the Volsci people, and leads a military campaign which brings him back to the gates of Rome, and with the city at his mercy, his mother, wife and children step forward and beg him not to go through with this and instead to seek peace. He does so, and depending on how you believe the story ends, he is then murdered quickly or retires into a bitter exile. And what Shakespeare does with Plutarch is, for example, he moves the fable of the belly by Menenius from sort of before the events of Coriolanus's campaign to the front of the play, and he also simplifies the election of the consul. As I said, there would be 2 consuls and he only has 1, and he shortens the list of candidates too, and he also changes the ending. Coriolanus is murdered by the Volsci leader that he's formed an alliance with, because he's grown jealous of how much his men prefer Coriolanus and admire his martial valor more than his own. And whereas in Livy it's the people who clamour for Coriolanus be given a noble burial, in Shakespeare it's the aristocratic character, the Volsci leader, who says he should be buried as a nobleman. So what you get if you read Livy and Plutarch is considerable insight into how Shakespeare simplifies and rearranges his material, and it did greatly enhance my enjoyment of this play. So that was the first one for this month. And next I chose Julius Caesar, and I think most people will be familiar with the story here. The first half of the play, the first half, is the build-up to the assassination of Caesar, and here the principal character is Brutus, who is a close friend of Caesar and who is really torn about this assassination, but finally succumbs. And then afterwards you have all of the conspirators dying in horrible ways on the battlefield or by their own hand. And finally Octavio, Caesar's heir apparent, not a blood heir, but the person that Caesar had picked to lead after him, joins with Mark Antony and another figure, I believe, and they form the triumvir. Okay, so this was notable because it was a considerable upgrade on Coriolanus, because the sheer quantity of dramatic speeches was staggering, and it was just magnificent language from start to finish. I greatly enjoyed Coriolanus. When I put this one down, I was just breathing hard, and my wife said, "What's wrong?" I said, "This was just magnificent." So I strongly urge you to read Julius Caesar. I also watched a Hollywood movie version with Charlton Heston and some other luminaries. Perhaps John Gielgud was in there too. And I have to say, that was really enjoyable too. One shouldn't condescend about popular adaptations of Shakespeare's work. They can be hugely enjoyable and quite informative too. You get the real sense of the clamour of Rome as these political events are unfolding. Whereas when you read a text like this, the crowds feel rather mute, don't they? You just hear the words of the protagonists. So that greatly added to my enjoyment too. Then next, this one doesn't really have any proper links to the history of Rome. It's Titus Andronicus, sometimes characterized as a video nasty, and I have to agree, it's incredibly grisly. Some things stand out about this. Firstly, the introduction by Jonathan Bate is absolutely outstanding, and Jonathan Bate is one of my heroes as a Shakespearean scholar. It's absolutely no nonsense writing, but it's so insightful. Yes, he is definitely a great man, and I'm extremely keen to read more of his writing about Shakespeare. As for the story of Titus Andronicus, it borrows from Ovid's Metamorphoses, Book 6, the tale of Procne, Tereus and Philomela. Procne and Philomela are sisters. Procne is married to King Tereus, and he very charitably agrees to go and fetch Philomela from Greece and bring her back for a visit. However, on the voyage home, he falls in love with Philomela, and when they land, he takes her away, rapes her, and cuts out her tongue and imprisons her, then goes home and tells Procne, her sister, that sadly Philomela has died. Philomela, meanwhile, unable to speak, engages in weaving, and she produces a textile which tells her story, and this finds its way to Procne, who then realizes she's been lied to, she's been deceived, and she reunites with Philomela, and Procne's anger sees her exact a terrible, terrible revenge upon her husband. I'll say no more about that. Okay, so in Titus Andronicus, the violence is increased to an enormous extent. So Philomela is actually raped by two brothers, and they are the sons of Tamora, a kind of gypsy / Moorish queen who's been brought back as a prisoner to Titus Andronicus's domain, Rome, under a kind of fictitious leader, Saturnius. And Tamora is truly evil. That's one of the highlights of this play, actually, is that the villains are truly evil. And she has a Moorish lover, Aaron, who rejoices in how bad he is, how wicked he is. And at the end, just before he is put to death, he says, "If I ever did anything good in my life, I repent of it. And if I could live again, I would do even more evil things." So you're rather glad when Tamora and Aaron get their just desserts. But sadly, pretty much every character in this play, good or bad, is a victim. And by the end, there's only a couple of people surviving. Some people don't like this play. Many scholars dispute whether Shakespeare wrote it, but I quite enjoyed it. Yeah, so it wasn't as good as Julius Caesar or Coriolanus, but nonetheless, Titus Andronicus was a worthwhile read, and it's worth purchasing this edition, Arden's second edition, for the magnificent intro by Jonathan Bate. Okay, next I read Cymbeline. Now this is the strangest of Shakespeare's plays with a Roman connection, because this has a time travel aspect. When they're in England or Wales, then we're back at a very early period in English history. However, when the characters go to Italy, they're in Renaissance Italy, and their names change, which is very, very strange. Now this one also borrows from, let me find it, The Decameron by Boccaccio. Okay, so on day 2 of the Decameron, there is a story where some men are sat around boasting about the incorruptibility and the beauty of their wives, and one man has a wager with another that he will be able to seduce this man's wife and bring back proof. And so the wager is duly sealed, and this villainous character places himself inside a trunk and conspires to have it placed inside the woman's bedroom, comes out at night and makes some notes about what's in the room, sees that she has a birthmark in an intimate location, and removes a piece of her jewelry, takes these pieces of evidence back to the husband, who believes that this is proof that his wife has been seduced, and is understandably very angry and loses the wager. This story is itself a retelling of the rape of Lucretia, which is found in Livy's The Early History of Rome once again, and this was about the actions or the antics of Tarquin Superbus, the 7th Roman king, and he sat around similarly with his soldiers, heard one of them telling about how his wife was perfect in every way, and he went off, tried to take her by consent. When he couldn't, took her by force, and it was this rape that prompted Junius Brutus to swear that he would rid Rome of the Tarquins, and basically Rome would never again live under a monarchy. This, of course, was taken by Shakespeare as the basis for his The Rape of Lucrece, which you'll find in Shakespeare's poems. Okay, so just to explain how this story from the Decameron fits into the play, Cymbeline is the King of England, and he is the father of Imogen, and her mother has died, and the king has since remarried. So there is a wicked stepmother and her son, Cloten, an absolute dunderhead, who his mother wishes to marry Imogen. Imogen, however, against the wishes of the stepmother and her father, has married Posthumus. And Posthumus has gone off to Italy, so he is the person who boasts about the purity and the beauty of his partner, and it's an Italian who makes the wager and goes off to England and finds his way into the bedchamber inside the trunk, comes back and presents his evidence to Posthumus, who is so outraged that he arranges for his servant Pisanio to kill Imogen. However, Pisanio is torn and he simply can't do it, and so he disguises Imogen, and she goes off and has several adventures in Wales which link up with some events that have happened 20 years before the play's action begins. And I won't go into it anymore, other than to say that it was absolutely magical. Anyone who admires the works of Sir Walter Scott, as I do, is sure to find Cymbeline to their taste. It's an extraordinarily good romance. I really enjoyed the rich language here, the poetry of this from start to finish, and the end, the 5th act, is so beautifully managed. There are so many characters by this point on the stage in disguises, and each one steps forward in turn and reveals who they are and tells their backstory, and we get this harmonious ending with the central characters all coming back together, but also the political conflict between Rome and England being settled amicably too. Yeah, this was just brilliant. I strongly recommend Cymbeline, and it also contains a beautiful song when Imogen, in a male disguise, is believed to have died. Her 2 brothers, who don't know that they're her brothers, sing this song over what they believe to be her corpse. Yeah, hard to grasp, right? I will just read you this. Fear no more the heat of the sun, nor the furious winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, home art gone, and taken thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers, come to dust. Fear no more the frown of the great, thou art past the tyrant's stroke. Care no more to clothe and eat, to thee the reed is as the oak. The sceptre learning physic must, all follow this and come to dust. Fear no more the lightning flash, nor the all-dreaded thunderstone. Fear not slander, censure rash, thou hast finished joy and moan. All lovers young, all lovers must, consign to thee and come to dust. No exorciser harm thee, nor no witchcraft charm thee. Ghost unlaid forbear thee, nothing ill come near thee. Quiet consummation have, and renowned be thy grave. Beautiful lines, I'm sure you'll agree, frequently incorporated into funeral services in England, Ted Hughes among them, and there's also a reference to these lines in Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. Okay, I read one more Shakespeare play this month, and it was The Comedy of Errors. Highly entertaining. I was laughing out loud at numerous points. However, I feel this would be better seen as a performance rather than just reading it. So I won't say any more about it. Now, the three non-fiction works I read this month all concern history. First up, we have Hegel's The Philosophy of History, and his basic thesis is that throughout human history, we've been moving towards the development of individual freedom. So he traces this movement from the Oriental world to the Greek and Roman worlds, and finally to the Germany of Hegel's time. So this is an idealist account, and it's very informative. And to complement Hegel, a materialist history. And it's these 3 volumes by Fernand Braudel, his Civilization and Capitalism from the 15th to the 18th century. First of them is here, and it's just deeply, deeply informative, beautifully produced books with many pictures, charts, graphs, and it answers questions such as, when did people in Europe start using forks? So if you're interested in that kind of thing, you'll love this. And you would not believe that an 80-page chapter on bread could be quite as entertaining as it is. He's just a great writer, and he seems to have studied, well, researched just about everything. It doesn't just focus on Europe. There's stuff in here about China and Japan too, which I greatly enjoyed. And you get chapters on wine, on luxury, on housing, and so on. There are 2 more volumes which I'll just show you. I can't recommend these books enough. They're my favourite works of history, and they really do complement my literary studies. So that's the second one, The Wheels of Commerce. And finally, The Perspective of the World. If you're not aware of these books, I strongly advise checking them out. And finally this month, it was another book about the early history of Rome. It's Gary Forsythe's Critical History of Early Rome, chapters 3 and 4 are what I focused on. And he just explores Livy's sources and a contemporary of Livy's, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, a Greek historian. They are the 2 principal sources that we have for the history of early Rome. And this just provided excellent background, and it is very, very well written. It's from the University Library, actually. Okay, so that concludes my trip through my reading for this month. Now I have to choose the book of the month. So I will plump for Cymbeline by William Shakespeare. If you've never read this play, I sincerely recommend checking it out. I'm sure it won't leave you disappointed. All right, there we have it. All that remains is for me to bid you farewell in time-honored fashion. So until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.